Have you ever noticed how, when someone asks about your work setup and you mention you work from home full-time, not temporarily, not as a pandemic holdover, but as a permanent, deliberate choice, something shifts in their expression, a micro-judgment that reads somewhere between envy and concern, as if you've opted out of some essential human experience they can't quite imagine living without. They ask follow-up questions that feel less like curiosity and more like wellness checks. But don't you miss people? Don't you get lonely? How do you stay motivated without anyone watching? And you stand there nodding politely, while knowing with absolute certainty that you would rather quit your career entirely than return to an office 5 days a week. That the thought of commuting, of fluorescent lights and open floor plans, and mandatory small talk fills you with a dread so visceral it feels like your nervous system rejecting a transplanted organ. And yet inside you, there's this awareness that your preference marks you as different in ways that make others uncomfortable. You've watched colleagues eagerly return to offices, celebrating the energy of in-person collaboration, while you felt nothing but relief at remaining remote. You've seen the LinkedIn posts about the irreplaceable value of water cooler conversations and the magic of spontaneous brainstorming sessions. And you've wondered if something fundamental is missing in you. Some need for ambient human presence, some capacity for thriving in shared physical space that everyone else seems to possess naturally. Your home office isn't a temporary arrangement you're tolerating, it's a permanent sanctuary you're protecting. And the intensity of your commitment to never giving it up sometimes surprises even you. You wonder if you're being antisocial, stunted, if your fierce attachment to remote work reveals some inability to connect authentically, some failure of professional ambition, some quiet giving up on the parts of career growth that supposedly require physical presence. You've tried to articulate why returning to an office feels impossible rather than merely inconvenient. But the words always sound weaker than the feeling. Something about productivity, about focus, about work-life balance, when the truth is deeper and harder to explain. The office doesn't just tire you out, it fundamentally disrupts something essential about how you regulate yourself, how you think, how you exist in your own skin. But what if this isn't antisocial withdrawal or professional self-sabotage? What if your need to work from home permanently is revealing something profound about how your nervous system processes stimulation, how your brain achieves deep work, and what conditions allow you to show up as your most competent, creative, authentic self? What if the remote work arrangement everyone else treats as a temporary perk is, for you, a fundamental requirement for psychological functioning, not a luxury, but a necessity you've finally been given permission to claim? You're about to discover that your commitment to working from home forever isn't about avoiding people or shirking responsibility. It's about finally having access to the environmental conditions that allow you to do your best work while remaining mentally healthy. When corporate return to office mandates are announced and you feel your stomach drop with genuine panic while others express only mild disappointment, you notice how your reaction sets you apart. When you say, carefully, that you'd need to look for a new job if remote work ended, you see the confusion on faces. The unspoken question, is working from home really worth throwing away your career? The refusal to return becomes evidence that you're not a team player, that you lack ambition, that you've gotten too comfortable and lost your professional edge. They think you're lazy, undisciplined, that you spend your work from home hours doing laundry and watching Netflix, that without direct supervision, you can't maintain productivity, that your resistance to the office is really just resistance to accountability. They assume you're socially anxious or interpersonally incompetent, unable to navigate office politics or build the relationships that supposedly drive career advancement. They think you've been seduced by the ease of working in pajamas, that you're choosing comfort over growth, that your preference reveals a lack of seriousness about your professional life. The remote worker becomes code for someone who wants all the benefits of employment without the real work of showing up, engaging, being part of something larger than themselves. What's rarely considered is that your productivity isn't suffering in isolation. It's thriving in ways it never could in an office environment. That your focus, your creativity, your ability to do deep, complex work has exponentially improved since you eliminated the constant interruptions, the sensory overload, the emotional labor of navigating open floor plans. That your commitment to remote work isn't about avoiding people, but about accessing the specific conditions under which your brain functions optimally. Conditions that have nothing to do with laziness and everything to do with how you're neurologically wired. But preference for solitary work isn't incompetence, it's alignment with your actual operating system. To understand this, we have to step back to how different nervous systems respond to environmental stimulation and what psychologists call optimal arousal levels. Human beings exist on a spectrum of stimulation needs. Some people are what researchers call high sensation seekers, who require constant novelty, social interaction, and environmental variety to feel engaged and alive. Their brains need the buzz of activity to function well. But others are low sensation seekers, whose nervous systems become quickly overstimulated by the very inputs that energize others. For these individuals, the open office isn't energizing. It's neurologically exhausting, flooding their system with more stimulation than their brain can effectively process while maintaining focus on complex tasks. Inside your brain, your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive function, deep thinking, and complex problem solving, requires significant cognitive resources to operate at peak capacity. When you're in an office environment, your brain is simultaneously processing dozens of competing stimuli. Conversations happening 3 desks away, someone microwaving fish in the break room, the visual movement of people walking past, the social obligation to look engaged when someone approaches, the low-level anxiety about whether you should join the lunch group or whether working through lunch looks antisocial. Your prefrontal cortex doesn't get to allocate its full resources to your actual work because it's constantly redistributing cognitive energy to manage, filter, and respond to environmental inputs. This isn't a choice, it's how attention works neurologically. For many people, this ambient stimulation is either neutral or mildly positive. Their brains can filter background noise effectively, and the social energy of shared space provides enough benefit to offset the distraction costs. But for you, the equation is fundamentally different. Your brain's filtering system isn't as automatic. Processing and dismissing irrelevant stimuli takes conscious effort, which means cognitive resources. At home, in a controlled environment where you decide what enters your sensory field, your prefrontal cortex can direct its full capacity toward your actual work. The difference isn't about willpower or discipline. It's about whether your brain is spending 30% of its processing power managing environmental stimuli or 95% of its power on the task at hand. Working from home doesn't make you more comfortable. It makes you neurologically available for deep work. Long before most people develop strong opinions about office culture, some children learn that solitude is where their mind works best, where they feel most like themselves, where they can think without the constant static of other people's energy interfering with their internal process. In classrooms, these were the kids who dreaded group projects, not because they couldn't collaborate, but because collaboration meant constant negotiation, compromise, and the cognitive load of managing other people's emotions and work styles while trying to think clearly. They learned early that their best ideas came during quiet individual work, that they could focus deeply when alone in ways that became impossible when surrounded by others. When you grow up in environments where you're constantly told you should want more social interaction, where solitary preference is pathologized as shyness or antisocial tendency, rather than recognized as a valid cognitive style, you internalize the message that something is wrong with how you're wired. Teachers express concern that you keep to yourself too much. Parents worry you're not developing social skills. The entire educational and professional culture operates on the assumption that collaboration, teamwork, and shared space are universally beneficial. That if you prefer solitary work, You simply haven't learned how to work with others properly. But for some brains, collaboration isn't a skill deficit. It's a fundamentally different and more cognitively expensive process than individual deep work. This is why the shift to remote work felt less like an adjustment and more like finally being allowed to breathe. For the first time in your professional life, you weren't spending the first 2 hours of your day recovering from a commute, transitioning from your actual self into your office self, calibrating your energy to match the room's expectations. You could start work when your brain was actually ready to think, not when your body happened to arrive at a desk. You could structure your day around your cognitive rhythms rather than someone else's idea of when real work happens. You could take a 10-minute walk to process a complex problem without worrying about whether your absence from your desk would be noticed and judged. The work itself didn't change, but your access to your own cognitive capacity expanded dramatically. These patterns follow you into the return to office debates, into conversations with managers who insist that innovation happens in person, while you have months of evidence showing your best, most innovative work emerged during uninterrupted solo, deep work sessions at home. Into relationships where partners don't understand why you're willing to change jobs rather than return to an office 3 days a week. Why something that seems like a minor inconvenience to them feels like an existential threat to you. You're not being dramatic. You're protecting access to the working conditions under which you can actually function as your most capable self. The question isn't why you want to work from home forever. The question is why you were ever expected to be productive in an environment fundamentally misaligned with how your brain works. Beneath the practical arguments about productivity and work-life balance, there's a layer most people never admit to carrying: shame. Quiet, persistent shame that whispers your need for remote work, reveals you're not tough enough, not adaptable enough, not professional enough to handle what everyone else manages without complaint. That your resistance to returning to an office proves you lack the resilience and social skills of a properly functioning adult. That you're choosing isolation because you can't handle the normal challenges of workplace relationships. In a culture that romanticizes the office as the site of innovation and treats physical presence as evidence of commitment, wanting to work from home permanently becomes a confession of inadequacy. Every article about the accidental creativity of water cooler conversations reinforces the message: real work happens when people are together. Every LinkedIn post from a CEO explaining why their company is bringing everyone back suggests that remote workers are missing something essential, that productivity metrics alone don't capture the intangible magic of shared space. The entire discourse operates on the assumption that offices are the default, natural environment for work, and if you can't thrive there, something is wrong with you. You internalize this. You believe you should be able to just push through, adapt, be more flexible. But shame thrives on misattribution, on believing that what's actually a neurological difference in stimulation processing is a personal weakness. Your need for a quiet, controlled work environment isn't a failure of professionalism. It's a recognition of how your specific brain achieves optimal cognitive performance.
Research in occupational psychology shows that people vary dramatically in their optimal stimulation zone, the level of environmental input at which they function best. For some, that zone is high: bustling offices, constant interaction, ambient noise. For others, it's low: quiet spaces, minimal interruption, controlled sensory input. Neither is superior. They're different neurotypes requiring different conditions. Not weak, differently wired. Not antisocial, optimally productive in solitude. Not lacking resilience, protecting the conditions for sustained excellence. The shame you carry isn't about what you need. It's about living in a work culture that treats one neurotype as standard and everything else as deficit. You're not failing to adapt to the office. You're recognizing that the office fails to accommodate how you actually work best. There's nothing defective about a brain that does its most innovative, focused, excellent work in quiet solitude rather than amid the chaos of open floor plans. You're allowed to require what you require without apologizing yourself into compliance with someone else's idea of professional normalcy. For many people, the office provides genuine value. The structure of commuting creates mental boundaries between work and life. The spontaneous conversations spark ideas they wouldn't have generated alone. The physical presence of colleagues creates accountability and energy that makes work feel less isolating and more purposeful. There's real benefit in that arrangement for brains that thrive on ambient social stimulation, that process thoughts through external dialogue, that need the ritual of going somewhere to do work. But working from home forever isn't about rejecting the potential value of offices for others. It's about recognizing that what energizes one neurotype depletes another, and that the same spontaneous interruptions that spark creativity for some people completely derail deep cognitive work for others. Where office workers find motivation in visible accountability and colleague presence, you find motivation in the clarity that emerges when your brain isn't constantly processing environmental noise. Where they need structured separation between work and home, you need the integration that allows you to structure your day around your actual cognitive rhythms rather than arbitrary office hours. The energy they get from collaboration, you get from uninterrupted focus. You haven't opted out of professional excellence. You've identified the conditions under which you can achieve it. Neither path is superior. Neither reveals more commitment, more creativity, more capacity for meaningful work.
What matters is alignment, matching your work environment to your actual neurological needs, rather than forcing yourself into conditions that require you to work against your brain's natural functioning. The cultural script says real professionals show up, that physical presence equals dedication. But dedication is about the quality of work you produce, the problems you solve, the value you create, and that can happen anywhere. Your willingness to advocate for remote work, to say, "I need this to do my best work," instead of apologizing for it, demonstrates more professional self-awareness than forcing yourself into an office where you'd spend half your cognitive resources just managing the environment. When you step back and look at the whole picture, from the neurological reality of different stimulation thresholds to the childhood experiences of learning you think best alone, to the research showing deep work requires conditions most offices can't provide, something becomes clear. Your commitment to working from home forever isn't a professional limitation. It's information about the conditions under which you function optimally, information that most workers never get the opportunity to gather because they never experience the controlled environment of sustained remote work. The shame you've carried about needing this arrangement, the self-doubt about whether you're being too rigid or antisocial, the worry that you're somehow failing at professional normalcy, all of it can dissolve when you understand that you're not broken. You're operating according to a different, equally valid cognitive profile. People who commit to working from home permanently aren't avoiding challenge or shirking professional responsibility. They're individuals whose brains achieve peak cognitive performance in quiet, controlled environments where they can direct their full attention to complex work without the constant cognitive tax of managing office stimulation. Whose best ideas emerge during uninterrupted deep work sessions, not spontaneous conversations. Whose professional excellence is protected, not diminished, by their fierce boundaries around remote work. You're not less ambitious. You're more strategically self-aware. You're not antisocial. You're optimizing for the cognitive conditions that allow you to contribute your highest value work. You've shaped yourself into someone who knows that where you work matters as much as how hard you work. That environment isn't a trivial preference, but a fundamental factor in cognitive capacity. This doesn't mean every job can be remote, or that you'll never benefit from occasional in-person collaboration, or that your needs won't evolve. Some roles genuinely require physical presence. Some complex projects benefit from synchronous, real-time interaction. But it does mean you get to stop treating your need for remote work as a character flaw while you navigate your career. You get to seek out roles and companies that offer permanent remote options without apologizing for the requirement. You get to recognize that the explosion in remote work opportunities isn't just convenient for you,
It's evidence that the working world is finally beginning to accommodate different cognitive profiles instead of forcing everyone into the same neurologically exhausting environment. Your preference isn't holding you back. It's pointing you toward the work arrangements where you can genuinely excel. If this video put words to something you felt but never quite articulated, if you've been carrying quiet shame about your fierce commitment to remote work, about being the person who'd rather change jobs than return to an office, about needing quiet and solitude to do your best thinking while others thrive on collaboration and office energy, you're not alone. There are millions of us whose brains work best in controlled, quiet environments, whose professional excellence depends on conditions most offices can't provide, whose commitment to remote work is a commitment to working with our neurology instead of against it. I'd love to hear your experience. Drop a comment and share what working from home has made possible for you that the office never could. What does your brain do in solitude that it can't do amid office chaos? How do you navigate the pressure to return or explain your need for permanent remote work? And if you want more conversations like this, about the quiet patterns of the human mind, the ways our needs get pathologized when they don't match cultural defaults, the boundaries we've been taught to apologize for when they're actually revealing what we require to function, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore these spaces together, finding language for the experiences that don't fit into standard professional narratives, making room for all the ways a person can be both different and excellent. Your work environment isn't a minor preference. Neither is your need for it.